Fáilte Jack an eagrán Jenny de Ardan Ardán podchraoltaí Ceiliúradh Chaomhnóireachta agus lomsa nniu tá Linda Ervine Gráinne Ghilen. You're all very welcome into this latest edition of Ardan, the podcast, which is looking at the celebration of custodianship and all that flows from that. We chat to different people, getting their perspective on what they feel they are custodians of, how they feel we approach the question of custodianship of either a cultural heritage or a political position or whatever it happens to be in a divided city with divided allegiances. So we'll start today by just having our guests introduce themselves. Gráinne, tell us who Gráinne Ghilen is, what you do and what you do.
Is mis Gráinne Ghilín agus tá me gobar le Cultúrlann MacAdam Fiaich mar Stiúrthóir Thuras is bul firste dú das me níos dúisgurt bul firste I gantar an tobar Ghill agus for my scoíocht in sin agus cai me beidir Jake MacSiacais muoithe sanna tú Gorky ar an ollscoil agus hís sa spidal a Connemara ach tá mar raisimal first is le Jarhín Seach agus a play leis an Gaelic and Tamar Fad. So I'm Gráinne Ghilen and I work as Executive Director in Cultúrlann MacAdam Fiaich. I'm from Belfast, grew up in Whitewell, got all my schooling in North Belfast and left for a while, for about 10 years, went to university in Cork and lived in the Connemara Gaeltacht for a while. But I've been back in Belfast for about 17 years and working in various realms of the Irish language, media, education, and now an arts centre, Cultúrlann.
Excellent. And Linda, who's Linda Ervine and what are you up to?
Is mis Linda Ervine is Spanish mé leis an Chultúrlann Thuras in our herbal forestry. Is that our herbal forestry? Can I say about myself? I was educated in East Belfast. I left school very early. Unexpectedly, I had my first baby at 16 and had 3 children by the time I was like 22. No education whatsoever, worked in chippies and things like that. And then in my 30s, I went into education and just fell in love with it. Went to Queen's University and did a degree in English, did a PGCE, taught in a local secondary school in East Belfast for 9 years, and then came across the Irish language and ended up now doing the job I do in Turas and struggling away to learn Irish.
Excellent. Well, there are lots of areas that we could just jump into straight away, but trying to get some stuff out of the road. There are obviously challenges in promoting Irish in East Belfast and challenges in West Belfast, but there are also challenges as women heading up organisations in what is still largely a misogynistic society. How do you deal with that? Do you face that head on? Do you do what most women do and just let it wash over you? Gráinne.
Yeah, let's just jump right in there. Yeah, I suppose it's something I didn't really think about too much until maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I worked for a long time as a freelance translator and wasn't in a workplace, and a lot of the dynamics that happen in workplaces I never had to deal with them. I work mostly with women, and I find it a very nourishing place. Also with the men I work with are supportive. I suppose there are funny things, like for example, because I'm physically small, 5'2", sometimes when you're in a conversation with people who are much taller than you can feel left out because the conversation is literally happening above your head, and I think that's something that you have to find other ways to make your voice heard and make your opinion heard, because even on a physical level the conversation isn't happening at your physical level. I suppose I find with some men that they're not even aware of ways in which women are not included or women are not involved, and that there is work to do. You know, there's working with the arts in particular, and fair play, the kind of movement within traditional music. As an arts organisation, we feel a responsibility to ensure that there's at least 50-50 women and men are given opportunities to perform in our organisation. It happens naturally as a woman. You know, I suppose I'm more tuned in to who those performers are, but I feel that it's harder for men. For some reason, a lot of men don't even see that there is an imbalance there. So what do I do about that? I suppose I point it out. Sometimes I'll make a snide comment or a sarcastic comment, and it's not a comfortable thing to do. Other times, I'll just have a quiet talk to somebody and just make sure that we're making sure that there is equality of opportunity there. So different ways to do it, depending on my mood, depending on how much sleep I had the night before, depending on who I'm speaking to. I suppose you have to be a bit of a shapeshifter in life in general, depending on who you're talking to, meet people where they're at, learn from the way you communicate with people. Did your message get through? Did anything change or not? Try the next approach.
And Linda, the same to yourself. I mean, you grew up in an inner city area in Belfast. It's a rough enough town, as we all know, the rough and tumble. But do you see any particular challenges for you as a woman?
Yes, I do. And I think when I look at my own background, I was in a single parent family, and I was a single mum at a very young age. And I spent a lot of my early life, because I didn't have education, because I was, the area I lived in, feeling very much that people talked down to me, and not being able, feeling very powerless and not being able to speak out for myself. And even when I looked into education and achieved an education and when I became a teacher, I still felt very intimidated by people who were educated, people who I perceived as being, I suppose, better than me. And then when I got this job, and what was used against me then was, the fact that I was sort of stepping out of line. And I suppose maybe part of me, I was just tired. I was just tired of being treated in that way. I was tired of being made to feel that I was something lesser. And especially by men, that attitude, that patronising attitude that you're going to be told, you're going to be put in your place, and that you're some wee woman. And, in some ways I think it played for me, because I think at first I wasn't really regarded as a threat. I was regarded as somebody that could be put back in their box quickly. But, in my own quiet, determined way, that's not who I am. And I just decided, well, I'm not going to be told, and I'm not going to be intimidated, and I'm not going to be undermined, and I'm not going to be threatened, and I'm just going to keep doing what I do.
Good stuff. I mean, one of the things that unites the two of you is that you both promote Irish language in this city, but you come at it from very different positions. Gráinne, you're in an organisation that promotes Irish through the arts, and obviously you work across the city, but you're located in the west. So does that present problems to you in the sense that we're in a divided city in general? It's politically divided, it's culturally divided, sometimes it's divided linguistically. So how do you manage your custodianship of the Irish language through the arts in a way that's inclusive and welcoming?
We're very lucky that we have a building, a physical space that's recognised and supported by funders such as the Arts Council and Belfast City Council, Forest na Gaelic, Department for Communities, Ciste Neisteachta na Gaelic. And that makes a huge difference, that there is that centre and that we have facilities where people can come in. I suppose going back to the foundation of the Cultúrlann, it always sought to be a politically independent place. that welcomes everybody, and it's good to see that people from all walks of life do come into the building. But of course, there's always more work we can do to bring people in. I suppose we're also lucky in that there is quite a Deluja Caintóirí Gaelic sa Cantor. Like there are quite a lot of Irish speakers in the area, and people who speak the language themselves, who work in different places, people who get their schooling here. So that support is there in general. But throughout the city, I think it's very interesting to look at there's been so much talk about language rights and what that actually means. So it's interesting to hear comments whereby people and other organisations can be very supportive of the language, but when that comes down to practical things like us providing documents in Irish or using Irish on an everyday basis, that we're questioned, well, why aren't you speaking English? We're going to have to go and get these documents translated. And we're like, well, yeah, that's what it means. That's what it means to facilitate another language that's not the dominant acoustic, and that's what it means to support a minority language group. So I think the work that has been done in the last 5 or 6 years, I suppose the focus that has been put onto Irish language rights in the last 4 or 5 years, because of the question around the Irish Language Act, has helped. It has helped to, Linda, you'll find this as well, the numbers of people wanting to learn the language.
Absolutely.
It has boosted it,
Very
all
much.
this talk. So normalisation of the language is really important. Signage, using it, opportunities to use it in media, in places where you don't normally hear the language, in places where English is the dominant acoustic, and I think that's one way in which we can do that, is to throw in the couple of focal. If we're at a meeting on a Zoom, for example, on a Zoom meeting with funders, for example, just putting in a wee note saying Gurmaigan at the end, just to show we're here, and we want to use the language, and it helps normalise.
Yeah, but obviously we're on a change and on a fluid environment, but the language has been politicised really since the settlement of Ulster, when the British made it part of their project to get rid of the language. But the language journey over the centuries hasn't been all one way. For example, in the 18th and then into the 19th centuries, there were quite a few Presbyterians and even members of the Church of Ireland who were champions of the language. That has always been there, but really during the period of conflict, Irish was solely the preserve, by and large, of one tradition. You made a decision to reclaim that heritage. What were the challenges there, Linda?
Well, there were a lot of challenges. I suppose my husband always says, I just don't think of the consequences, and maybe that's right. I met with this language. I'd never even learnt a language in school, so it was my first time to try and grapple with any other language. And, something intrigued me about it, and I just wanted to do it. And I was quite shocked then when I saw the reaction against that, and maybe in some ways that made me more determined to do it. I was also, I suppose, bolstered by other people who felt the same, that like me, because of the tradition that we come from. We hadn't learnt it in school, we didn't know any words of it, we'd never heard it in prayers. It was totally alien to us, and we wanted the opportunity to do it. It was difficult because you were going against some sort of invisible barrier that was telling you, no, this is not for you. And I suppose I had a perception too at the very start that, it didn't put me off, but it did make me feel slightly uncomfortable that, it wasn't my language, it was, a language that belonged in another community, it was a south of the border language maybe. Was I doing something wrong? Was I betraying something maybe? But I didn't know what it was betrayal. Now, of course, once I started on my journey and I started to read books like Presbyterians in the Irish Language and, Snoddy's in Ulster, and I started to realise that there are places, the most basic knowledge I did not have. And it was such an awakening to realise, this language has been around me all my life, but I didn't know. And I embraced that. But when I discovered things like the Presbyterians and the Church of Ireland and the fact that the language had went to Scotland and the Isle of Man, I suppose in many ways it gave me more of a feeling of ownership, that this did belong to me too. And, not in a sectarian sense, but just that, I could buy into this as well. And actually, the perceptions that many people have about the language, they just are incorrect. They're just incorrect. And yes, there is this history, but, for me, the language doesn't say, Catholic or Republican or whatever. It can be used by somebody who's Catholic, somebody who's Republican, of course it can. It can be used by anybody. But it's not the sole domain of one particular group. And I felt that was important, and I felt that my work was not so much about, I think some people say we're taking it back, not taking it back, wanting to be part of it. And really when I set out on my quest, it was to be part of the Irish language community and Irish language sector. And the one thing, I very much recognised from the word go that we were accepted, respected, helped, encouraged. I never felt any negativity, in any way.
That's encouraging to hear. But I mean, when you're coming from the position you're coming from in the community, you're coming from where there was such estrangement from the language, and I know that you've been appointed as one of the ministerial design group around the Irish language strategy, and I know that you're constrained, you can't really talk about what's being discussed within the group, but are there any particular perspectives or challenges that you're bringing to that group about how to promote Irish within a unionist, Protestant or loyalist community?
Yes. Well, what I've seen recently actually on official Zooms from a few places is an attitude towards the unionist community that everybody in the unionist community hates the language, devalues the language, has no interest in the language, doesn't want engagement with the language. And of course that isn't true. And the majority of my learners come from the unionist community. We've taught hundreds of people over the years. Most of the talks that I do are for people within the unionist community who may never learn the language, but they're intrigued, they're interested, they have no issue with the language. A lot of them have no issue with language legislation. So I think it's very sad when there is this perception that people from within the unionist community, for instance, I was on a Zoom and it was mentioned about signage, and if somebody from Tigers Bay applied for signage, that would obviously be mischief making, rather than, well, mightn't get anywhere because the rest of the neighbours in the street, they have the same right to go through the procedure as somebody who lives in Ardán. So why should there be a natural assumption that because it's coming out of a particular area that there's no genuine interest? When of course we know, attitudes are changing, they're breaking down, demographics are changing within Belfast. So why can't that not be recognised?
Yeah, but are there any bespoke challenges that the journey of the Irish language in the nationalist or the Catholic community, for want of a better word, really began with the revival in Belfast in the 60s. So it has made quite a lot of progress. A lot of that was self-help. But you're starting from a very low base, so are there particular things that need attention paid to them?
Well, I suppose at the minute, when we started our own centre, Turas, it took time, it was slow, there was barriers for facility, which we've managed to overcome, so we're in a good place. But now we've started an e-school, which immediately before it even got the chance to open, faced intimidation, sort of hate speech and whatnot. We need that to grow, we need that to develop. It's hard to do because we don't have, I suppose, a lot of political support. We don't have community support, unlike the community, in the nationalist community, you know, we can't put buckets in shops or go around the bars and raise money in that way. That's not going to happen. Maybe someday. So, you know, we are starting at a very low ebb. We have to be careful about where we actually open up, because we are aware that there is hostility towards us, and also, you know, what is viewed as us just wanting to go somewhere and open up, you know, a nursery school for 16 3-year-olds is viewed as us being confrontational, us trying to cause trouble, and, you know, nothing could be further from the truth. You know, we want to just get on with it, and we want to, I suppose, most importantly, provide the opportunity for parents within East Belfast who are interested in their children, you know, obtaining the gift of bilingualism, interested in immersive education, giving them that opportunity. We're integrated Irish medium because we felt that was very important, actually. To go further, I suppose, in the Irish medium sector would say, as you know, our schools are open to everybody. We wanted to say, well, actually, you know, we want to ensure that we have 40-40-20. So we're taking that extra step. And also, we knew that we needed that message, because many people misinterpret what the Irish medium sector is about, and they perceive it as being, you know, part of the CCMS sector, which of course it isn't. And I mean, I was guilty of that. So for us, bringing the two sectors, the integrated and the Irish medium together, was, you know, saying, you know, look, you know, this is important, this is for everybody. And when I look at the makeup of our parents in the new school, you know, with some that are just Protestant, some that are just Catholic, but actually the majority of them are mixed marriages, and the children are others. So, you know, for me, it speaks of people who are just, you know, they're tired of tribalism. They don't sign up to one thing or the other. They just want something different, you know.
Yeah. Gráinne, I mean, you happen to be located in a Presbyterian church,
Yeah.
so what opportunities did that throw up for you? And congratulations, by the way, it's your 30th year. And I know that you do have active links with the Presbyterian community that used to worship here. Many people find it astounding that there was still a Presbyterian meeting house operating on the Falls Road in 1982. So what opportunities does that throw up to kind of do what you talked about, normalise the language and build bridges across perceived divides?
Yeah, well, I think people, the sort of Cultúrlann community, if you want to call it that, the people who visit, the people who use the place, work there, have businesses there, run events there, like, we are really interested and fascinated by that history, by the change that has happened in the area. When you don't look back and try and imagine the area back 125 years ago to 126 years ago when it was built, and all the green space that would have been around, and the people who lived here, the work they did, how did they entertain themselves in the evening. There's a natural curiosity about that, and there's a curiosity about how that change happened, how the dynamic changed, and the conditions in the neighbourhood that meant that people moved out, that the Presbyterian congregation moved out, and just the whole dynamic changed. And we're seeing a change now. It's happening now in a different way. There's lots of people moving in from other countries. Some are asylum seekers, so it's a much more multilingual place, and there are more people coming into the Cultúrlann who are trilingual or speak 4 languages and are very, very open to learning a language. But just to get back to the specific question, like, well, through our involvement with the group that you set up yourself, Jake, where you brought together Presbyterians who are interested in the Irish language together with us, and created a space where we could get together, talk to each other, find out more about each other's interests, and then out of that come up with ideas for projects, events that we can do with each other. So I suppose it's a lesson I learn every day, that the more you communicate with people,
Yeah.
the more you talk to them and the more you listen to them, then that's a very good platform from which to take the next step forward. So we currently have funding from the National Lottery Heritage Fund to collect oral history. So we've done a couple of interviews with people from the Presbyterian congregation who were here. I was delighted to meet someone, Jim Stuthers from the Presbyterian Church in Ireland, give a talk about the Irish language in the church back in June. It was our first event after lockdown with a live audience, a very small and socially distanced live audience, but he brought his cousin along who was baptised in that church, and it's very, very interesting. Like, the Cultúrlann is such it's so remarkable and noted as an Irish language centre, and then to meet people who have a connection with the place but don't necessarily have a connection with the language, or who don't have a connection with the Gaelic world at all. It's very, very interesting crossover, and there's a lot of opportunity there for both parties to learn from each other and for new things to spring out of that meeting.
One of the other things that Gráinne mentioned is the change in face of the city, that there are new communities coming in, and then looking back as how it was. And I know that when we launched Celebrating Custodianship, which is the reason for these podcasts, that Peter Finn in St Mary's University College was saying that when he was a junior lecturer, he carried out a survey of the area as it had been when the college was set up, and there were 250 Irish-speaking teachers in the college, but the terrace that runs down from the college right along the front of the Royal, 1/3 of the residents were Church of Ireland, 1/3 were Presbyterian, and 1/3 were Catholic. You know, and I know that when one of the invitees to the podcast here was a Presbyterian minister from the West Cork and Shankill, and he was telling me that he has parishioners now living beside the Cultúrlann who frequent the Cultúrlann, and they're Farsi speakers. They speak Farsi, they speak English, they speak some other languages as well. And I went across last week with Tom Hartley to the final service of Windsor Presbyterian Church, which formerly was Broadway. They've now moved to Great Victoria Street, and the service was bilingual in Farsi and in English, because there are so many from the new communities that are part of that church. Who is the same happening in the east of the city, or is there that more eclectic mix of cultures and languages and people?
I think it's happening. I mean, there is a more eclectic mix because a lot of people, have moved into the area from outside, and obviously, a lot of years ago, a lot of Polish people coming in. And I suppose what's happened, I see in East Belfast, and I saw it as my time as a teacher, is, people came from other countries and settled, and I suppose just integrated in many ways. And maybe in some ways that's easier for the Polish people. More difficult maybe sometimes for people with from maybe Asian people and African people and whatnot. I think the lovely thing about more people coming over is, if you think during the Troubles, we didn't have anybody here. The only visitors we had were journalists, and I remember actually I probably well into my 20s, maybe older, maybe 30s, before I saw a black person really up close. Now that seems really strange now, and actually stirring, because it seemed so strange to me, And I always think that hopefully, people coming here with their own culture and their own language, and I think it's really important that they keep that culture and their language, because sometimes in the rush to come here and to integrate here, they lose a part of themselves. And, to me, they should be passing their language on to their children, passing their cultural background on to their children, and making sure they retain some of who they are, because someday, they'll look back and think, oh my goodness, in my rush to have English, in my rush to fit in, I lost something very precious. But I think the benefit for us here in Northern Ireland is, well, I hope that it waters down, our tribalism, because, you know, if your background is Polish and, you know, maybe your parents or even one of your parents is Polish, you know, down the generations, you know, what does this mean to you? You know, or if you're Asian or, you know, you're African, you're Zimbabwean or whatever, you know, what is our little parochial row here? So I hope it waters down, I hope it dilutes that, because, you know, as our communities become more cosmopolitan.
Yeah, well, that idea of Linda's describing it as watering down, I would see it more as enriching. That, I mean, we're all mongrels. Let's face it, you know, this idea that there are pure races, it's just a nonsense, and has long been accepted as a nonsense. So Ireland has had wave after wave of visitors or invaders, or whatever you want to call them, but they came in the shape of Vikings, and then the Norse, and then Norman French, and, you know, so there are all those influences there which fed into the Irish identity. What's the Irish identity to you, Gráinne, in 2022? I mean,
I love the question of identity. It brings me right back to my childhood, you know, my own personal journey, trying to work out who am I. It took me to India, it took me to 40-day silent retreats, contemplating questions like this, and I think that me learning the language, the Irish language, was a very important part of the journey to kind of work out those three questions of who am I, what is this place, and what am I doing here. And I think the language brought me back to, it connected me with my ancestors and stories I would hear from my grandmother about her father going to classes in the art school down the road, or looking at the census and discovering that my great granny was an Irish speaker in County Galway in 1911, and things like that. So there's like this personal joy that I take from speaking Irish, and that I took from the whole journey of learning it from I was an 11-year-old, and just discovering new things every day about the place around us and the history and the people. So I think the language is a great sort of mode of transport into that question of who are you and what's your identity. In 2022, what is
an Irish identity? How do you define it?
It's funny, I'm looking out the window here, and just the landscape. There's a mountain, there's a quarry, there are red brick houses, there are modern buildings, and it's just a whole tapestry that tells the story of the evolution of the place and the people and the interests they had and that kind of thing. And there is clearly no one way of being an Irish person or expressing your Irishness or Gaelicness either. There are just things that we've been fed this narrative along for years through media of two communities, and it's just not true. There's so much intermingling and intermarriage, and people who have grown up under two different traditions. I only discovered recently that an aunt of mine through marriage has lived in the Shankill and lived in Rathcoole and lived in Mount Vernon. I hadn't known any of this about her, and it made me see her in a new light. And she has grandchildren who attend Irish medium schools, and you know, there is no one path to Irishness and no one expression of it, and it's very exciting. I think it's so rich.
But that's a great point that Gráinne brings up there, Linda, about this idea of two communities. And I constantly, with the civil service, say, they say, what community? There is only one community, which is hugely complex and which can't be boxed in. I mean, like, I'm West Belfast, Republican, Irish speaking, but I learned piano on the Earlswood Road from Babcia and Jaja Zalewski, who were the parents of my mother's sister's husband. You know, they spoke Polish around me. They didn't speak any English. And Jaja came here when he was in the Polish Air Force in the Second World War. Stayed, got a job in shorts. They had a bit of money, so they didn't need to learn English, because they did everything through their servants. And when I was being taught piano, I was getting rapped in the knuckles, and she was shouting at me in Polish. I never learned anything other than Chinguya, which was thank you. So, but that idea of a sense of Irishness or a sense of identity, how do you define yourself? And I mean, you tick all these boxes, but you also tick all those boxes. I mean, what does it mean in 2022 to embrace the Irish element of your identity? What's that mean?
Well, I mean, I've never regarded myself as anything but Irish. And, you know, nobody ever sat me down in my family and told me I was Irish, but it was all around me. And I suppose one of the things that really came home to me was on my father's side, and I was very, very close to my grandparents on my father's side. My nanny was a woman who was born in Thistle Street on the Newton Road, same house my daddy was born in, same street we were living in when I was born. But my granddad was an Englishman from Essex who had come over here in the 1930s. Now, they used to row all the time, but they were very comedic rows, there was never any sense of threat. So he was always that bloody Englishman, and he was always wrong because he was that bloody Englishman, and they were a bloody Englishman, and they do this. So we knew that was different from who we were because we were Irish, you know. Celebrated St Patrick's Day, we did all the things. And, you know, my first husband, who was also from the Newton Road, had joined the Royal Irish Rangers to avoid being, you know, forced into joining the paramilitary group when he was young, and served 3 years. On his army papers, I mean, he regarded himself as Irish. On his army papers it said nationality British/Irish. He loved celebrating St Patrick's Day. You know, so I think I was in my early 30s the first time that somebody said to me, and it was from my own community, that I wasn't Irish. That we're not Irish. So like, you know, we live, and if there's a clue in the name, we live in Northern Ireland. I mean, it felt to me like somebody, like I was in the asylum and I was pointing at something black and everybody else was going, no, that's white. You know, because of course we're Irish. We're British. In my opinion, I'm British and I'm Irish, that's who I am. But, you know, being Irish, I suppose, comes first. I'm British in a general way because, you know, I'm a UK citizen. But I'm Irish because I'm from this place. And also, you know, if people try to sort of put me into a box, you know, somebody once said to me, well, you're a planter. And I thought, well, you know, who am I actually? Because, again, my grandfather on my father's side was English. My nanny, her maiden name was Watson, definitely Ulster Scots, there are people from Saintfield. But on my mother's side, my grandmother was Kathleen Kelly, a Catholic woman from Clifton Street. And my grandfather was from a Presbyterian from Ghilín with a very Irish name. So, you know, who does that make me? What is that? What is my identity? And, you know, this is the place that I was born. I'm a native of this place, you know. So to me, if I reject my Irishness, I'm saying, well, I'm a usurper, I don't belong here. Of course I belong here. I belong here as much as anybody else. And, you know, as you mentioned, Jake, the idea that there's a pure Gael or there's a pure, you know, Scottish person or something, it's just a lie. And, you know, the Presbyterians came over here 400 years ago and we've lived in this bubble and we've never intermarried, or it's just wrong and it's not true. And, you know, they talk about two communities, as you say. Well, we are one community, but we're one community who have been very good at separating ourselves and creating difference. And even in my lifetime, I have seen difference created and traditions created that didn't exist when I was a child. But somebody's now telling me or trying to tell me, no, we never did that. Well, I think we did do that. I remember saying, no, that we didn't, because we don't do that, they do that. You know, so I think I'm nervous and frightened of kind of when people try to force on me, you know, what is meant to be my identity. You know, I'm very aware and I'm happy to let other people you know, have their say in what they want. Don't tell me who or what I am. I'm very aware of who and what I am.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, and we need to start drawing the threads in together and coming to a conclusion, but I think the idea that you can in any way say that a language and a cultural tradition has a set of politics attached to it is a nonsense. It just isn't true, either in theoretical terms or in practical terms. I mean, the Irish language community for me is a very, very diverse community. You have all sorts of people within it. And when you look at the Irish language movement, I mean, the Johnsons and the Jamisons and the Jacksons who were promoting Irish, we're all planters. Unless there was a crowd of them somewhere down the country that nobody heard about. So I mean, that idea that anybody in this community, as you say, Gráinne, there is so much intermingling. We don't need to go too far in any of our families defined traditions from all sorts of different places. But what's the hopeful message as an Irish language community moving forward to maybe address some of those wider societal divisions, you know, that because it's quite easy for politicians, and I don't want to be politician bashing, they have to get votes, but the way this place is constructed, the two big main blocks simply have to work on a political dynamic which says we're not going to let them prevail. You know, that we're not going to let the other prevail. So how do cultural activists and members of civic society start challenging that, come down below the political level, move aside from party politics, because everybody has their politics, and sort of say, how do we reacquaint ourselves as a community with all the complexities that we have?
I think we need to start just seeing each other as we are, and we need to allow ourselves on a personal level to be who we are, and to have the confidence to embody and realise who we are, whatever that is, and that touches on many different aspects of identity. It could be, well, our gender, our sexuality, our political beliefs, our cultural background, what language we speak, our abilities and disabilities. There are just so many ways and so many mixtures, so many different ways in which a human being can be mixed around different ingredients and different amounts that creates a uniqueness, and to allow each one to just be who they are, to see that, and to, I don't know, does it come from maybe the way people interpret things in the Bible, that you should be this and marriage should be that, and this is the way you should be, and somehow that has been presented in society as the norm. But when I think of my friends, when I think of the Irish language community and the people there, like every single one of us has our own wee oddness, you know, or our own weird interest that has nothing to do with the language or the culture, you know. There's just, be it music or dance or whatever it is, and there's to celebrate that, to allow people to do that. And it's very, very rare to find a person who feels comfortable enough to be who they are and to feel that wholeness in themselves. But when you do meet somebody like that, it's very inspiring, because it gives you permission to do that, and it's a great feeling, and it spreads. It has a very, very positive influence on everybody around them. So I think just maybe to bring in maybe some of the Eastern philosophy of witnessing, to not be so quick to judge people and put them into boxes, but to just stand back, observe, allow, witness, see, listen, appreciate.
Yeah. that idea of the complexity of all, my daughter summed it up brilliantly for me when Robin Swan announced that you could meet 8 people outside without issues, and my daughter said, I don't know anybody without issues. You know, so we are that kind of a society, you know. But for you, Linda, I mean, on a personal level, the journey that you started in Turas was really inspirational for me. It gave me a sense that this was a city reacquainting itself with a cultural flowering that had happened in the 19th century. You know, when Conradh na Gaeilge was set up on the Beersbridge Road in the east of the city, the man setting it up was a Donegal Irish speaker. The person taking the notes was the Grand Master of the Orange Order, William Rutledge Kane, who's buried here on the Falls Road. But that reawakening of that cultural curiosity, and it was our chairperson, Sean Mitchell, when we began to do work right across the city. Sean says that our mission was to be culturally promiscuous, which is a great term. And so your work inspired me. How do you see us moving forward? Are you hopeful about the future? Do you think that things are going to progress, or are we going to go back into the trenches?
No, I am very hopeful, and I think sometimes, you know, some of the stuff that's happened is maybe the dying roars of old attitudes, because I do see so many people, especially young people, who want to move forward, and they're not interested in the past, they're not interested in the grey suits. Now, I know that we still have a minority of young people who weren't born, and they're fighting the war, yet, you know, it wasn't their war. But I think we just have to push ahead. You know, for me, I just don't buy into it, and I see so many people like that. I think the thing that gives me the greatest hope, and this is not me, you know, judging somebody's politics. I don't care what their politics is, but I get really hopeful, and I get quite excited when I see somebody, like, let's talk, somebody from a Protestant background, and I'm thinking of somebody in particular who decides they're going to join the SDLP. Or maybe somebody from the nationalist community who decides they're going to join the UUP. Now, it's not that I support either the UUP or the SDLP, but what I like is when somebody feels the freedom to get out of that box and say, well, you know, I might be from a certain tradition, there might be an expectation of me to behave in a certain way or to support a certain party or a certain viewpoint, but actually I'm going to do something different. And that's what I want to see. I want to see people's freedom, people to think for themselves and actually look at Northern Ireland politically and say, well, you know, I'm not going to vote this way because that's what my daddy did, that's what everybody around me does. I'm going to do this because this is what I want to do. So I suppose what I see has happened, you know, and we know there's issues, you know, the Good Friday Agreement maybe hasn't delivered everything we wanted, but I certainly couldn't be doing the work I'm doing without it. And I think it is paving the way for a more hopeful future where our communities will be not just integrated, but reintegrated. Because if we think back before 69, even though there were divisions, there was a lot of integration, there was a lot of intermarriage. Communities were a lot more, you know, diverse than we sort of, you know, feel now. You know, this attitude that people always lived in a particular way, it isn't true either. You know, and we know that.
Well, you only have to look at the amount of Presbyterian churches on the Falls Road to see that was the case. Look, mar local score Gráinne and we'll chat to be agad the phobal vil first, couple of focal a hoagie creating no torhi Cultúrlann novini.
Sílim beidir an rutin a bhí mar ball faoi a bheith muinina faoi céithú dhéan agus sin is féidir cinneal bon ahrú a dhéanú ar phobal sógainn agus ar hochaí sógainn ach a bheith mar thu dhéan agus a bheith muinínach in san éanúlaach sin agus díreach spás a chur fáid do riine eile le bheith mar atá siad héan. Agus dúchlann nuair a ecann tú éagóir dúchlann na bhórt.
My Gráinne. Linda, focal score. What have you anything that you want to either throw out as a challenge or as an opportunity for us all going forward?
Well, I suppose the challenge which I put out to the Irish language community, and I think again with some of the young people, and it's not something that I witness, I have to say, but I know it obviously exists everywhere, is to make the language something that I've tried to do, a medium of reconciliation, not a tool, not a symbol of something that's kind of one-sided, but something that can reach across the divide and bring people together.
Right, so Nianan sé dúsa Gerald Correlation on just bring things to a close with a really great thank you Gráinne, Gurumili Mogat, and thank you Linda, agus Ganeri Liv. May you keep long ploughing the furrows you are ploughing and shaking things up. My Shiv.
Two and Foster, Gurumili.
Gurumili.